Hello.
Welcome back to the Space School Log. Today we're finishing off this two-part episode. Special thanks to all of our patrons who couldn't decide on what video they wanted for today. Otherwise, our story continues on the city world of Coruscant. Luke woke up in his room and his thoughts sat on the new world he was welcomed into. Everything felt so different to Luke. He couldn't sleep. To his right was the entire city of Coruscant. It was beautiful, and yet it felt so much more different than the Coruscant he knew. Luke, after the rebellion defeated the Empire, had the chance to see what would become of the temporary capital of the New Republic. Coruscant was considerably happy with the fall of the Empire. Celebrations happened shortly after Palpatine's death. But the Empire cracked down on the planet with Operation Cinder, and several other contingency plans. While Operation Cinder never saw Coruscant, the people of the capital planet saw the pain around the galaxy from the contingency plans. They wore it. It was like a burden of unwanted trauma, and it weighed down on the people. Of course, after the Empire there was happiness, but this was different. After all, for these people in this timeline, it had been 32 years since the end of the Clone Wars, since the disappearance of the Sith from the main galactic stage, and aside from the now dead Maul and Talon, the Sith were gone. In his own mind. Luke's mind drifted towards what could have become of the other Luke that should have been present here. So Luke pushed himself up and sat in the middle of his bed and closed his eyes, focusing on the Force. He assumed that if he searched for his own essence, he could likely find the other Luke, but after an hour or so he couldn't find anything. Then Luke came up with a theory. Is it possible that it could be wrong? Of course. But Luke assumed that he and the Luke from this timeline switched, because they are both curious individuals. And there could have been another means for Luke to access the world between worlds, being that in that same period of time, Luke from this peaceful timeline accidentally allowed his father to commit the crime of cutting off Mace Windu's hand, in the same way that Luke pulled Anakin's lightsaber, creating this timeline that he now existed in. The Luke from this timeline may have accidentally forced Anakin's hand. Luke was able to perpetuate this theory by assuming that the Luke from this timeline, not having grown up in the struggles of Tatooine or war, he could have been curious as to what would have happened on that tragic night if everything changed. And in doing so, he didn't get Mace's hand cut off, but instead Anakin killed Windu by mistake, because a Luke who didn't have the trials of facing down Darth Vader wouldn't have had the precision of a Luke that did. It was a far-fetched idea, but it felt right. There was no sight of this other Luke, and so maybe he was right. In all actuality, he was right. Both Lukes, through the mysticism of the Force, entered the world between worlds at the exact same time, during different timelines, and ended up completely flipping and switching, becoming individuals a part of different universes and timelines. The Luke born on Tatooine had a much more pleasant adjustment to the Luke born on Coruscant, who was welcomed into the hellscape of a fallen empire, learning that his sister was married and that his father committed a mass genocide more frequently than he changed armor. Regardless, Luke moved on from his bedroom to the center lobby of the apartment, where he sat silently. His father walked up to him and asked him,
"Is everything all right, son?"
Yeah, Father. It's just a bit weird. I mean, everything is a bit weird. I don't really know how to process everything. I honestly would like to talk to Masters Kenobi and Yoda.
If you believe that'll make you feel better, I'll have it arranged for you. After all, Obi-Wan's been looking forward to meeting you. I told him about what you said to me, about how he raised you when I wasn't around.
Anakin patted Luke on the shoulder and told him that it would be the best for him to get some rest. When Luke made his way back to his bedroom, he fell down to the floor in his room. Memories and visions of the past that did not exist here fell into him. He remembered Order 66 through Grogu's memory, and he felt the trauma and pain and suffering of so many. And then, the breathing. It was like the breathing didn't go away, like it hadn't vanished. Luke was haunted by his meeting with the Emperor on the second Death Star, because the Emperor lived in his mind. In this timeline, the Emperor was never even a thing, nor did he ever get past Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker, but he was still something Luke couldn't escape. Luke was quiet about everything, and he got himself back up on his bed and pressed his hands to his face, feeling the soft skin of touch in one hand and the rough fabric of the glove in the other. Luke couldn't escape the feeling that something was off. While sure the galaxy seemed right, it was almost too right. Like it was a sick game being played on him by an external force. Maybe it was a lack of clarity in the Coruscant night, or maybe it was just a reflection of unfinished business, not done by the Emperor, but those who came before. While there was an impression that the Chosen One had helped restore balance of the Force, maybe that wasn't the truth, and the shadows had been lying not just for 32 years, but instead 42 years. Luke fell into his bed, as it felt like the bed was covering around him, suffocating him in a coffin of silence. There was so much wrong. What more could be done or said in this timeline? What more did he miss? Where was Han and Chewie? And what about everyone else? So much pressure. It felt like a bubble was blowing up inside of Skywalker's head. How could he possibly avoid this? It felt nearly unstoppable, like there was nothing he could do but lament here. Luke's heart rate picked up in his body, couldn't find a balance between hot and cold, tossing and turning, and after so little time here, the perfection came crashing down into non-existence. There was something evil here on Coruscant, something that wasn't here during his timeline, and it was calling out to him because he still had visions of the Emperor. Luke put his head into his pillow and finally fell into a deep sleep. He crashed hard, and then the night terrors began, following Vader into the reactor as the Death Star exploded, watching Han Solo be killed by a fiery crimson blade, and at the end of all of it Leia dying a lonely death surrounded by strangers. Luke woke up, jolted by the sound of an explosion. He looked outside of his window and saw terror. Imperial Star Destroyers raining hell down onto a population of Coruscant. It was all a dream. It was all fake. And then he heard laughing. Luke's breath picked up. He couldn't move. He looked out and saw Palpatine rounding the corner, laughing as he ever did so slowly, calling him boy before laughing at him. A fool because all of it was a deception. Everything he believed was real was just the imagination of the Force. The darkness was calling to him, and it was time for Luke to become what his father could never dream of becoming. Luke cried out in terror and shot up. He looked around the darkened room. His breath was heavy, and the room was silent. It was still dark outside of his room, aside from the lights of Coruscant, the lights that never slept, and yet there was no sign of terror. Luke lowered himself back down and his breath shallowed. He hoped he hadn't screamed aloud, and luckily he hadn't. Luke closed his eyes for a moment and knew that he needed to tell the Jedi Masters about this. He needed to deal with this because if he didn't, then it would forever plague him. Luke knew that Palpatine would always be with him, because the nightmares hadn't stopped in the decades since Palpatine's apparent death in the second Death Star in Luke's original timeline. Apparently those night terrors wouldn't come to an end. The rest of the night would be rather arduous, but in the morning, everything felt a little better for Luke, as his father took him to the Jedi Temple. This for Luke was an awe-inspiring moment. He'd been to the Coruscant Temple before, but never like this. Seeing so many Jedi, there were now 15,000 Jedi inside the Jedi Temple. There had been a massive boost in adequate Force-sensitive beings since the death of Palpatine, and in the 32 years since the end of the Clone Wars. They'd bolstered their numbers incredibly fast. The Jedi just didn't operate off of Coruscant, but they also now operated off of Dantooine, where they rebuilt the formerly fallen Jedi Temple. The Coruscant Temple was incomparable, quite even emotional for Luke, because he'd never seen so many Jedi and they all looked so happy, like there wasn't a thing wrong with the galaxy. And truthfully, there wasn't. The Hutt, Sigerians, Black Sun, and various other crime families had been driven from power, all of which happening shortly after the end of the Clone Wars. Luke walked through the hallways and was reminded of the nightmare that had happened here. See, when Luke visited the Jedi Temple after the fall of the Empire, he visited a reconstructed temple that was meant to fit the ideal image of Palpatine, who crowned the former Jedi Temple as his castle. The only images Luke ever saw of the Jedi Temple were from Grogu's flashbacks and from images he'd seen of the temple before it fell. This was much different. This was grandeur. It wasn't in ruins, it was absolutely remarkable. Anakin noticed that Luke was taking in the views, and he didn't say much to him. Anakin didn't really conceptualize how much of what Luke had gone through, or the galaxy Luke came from, but it would have horrified him if he actually saw what he and the 501st did inside the temple. And yes, speaking of the clones, most if not all of them had died by this point. They all aged out and their lives ended rather peacefully. The Republic allowed them to integrate into certain sectors of the galaxy without intermingling too much in the intergalactic gene pool. Reason being is that the Republic didn't want the children of the clones to have defects, because it was very often that they did have defects, such as an accelerated growth and being more physically dominant, sometimes even more violent. Though it depended on the clone or not. Captain Rex had served with the Grand Army of the Republic for another 3 years after the end of the Clone Wars, before he stepped down and retired. Anakin was with his captain in the last moments before he passed away. Regardless, Luke and Anakin ran into a proud Jedi Master, that being Master Ahsoka Tano. She had surprisingly rejoined the Jedi Order a couple years after the Clone Wars, having seen the Jedi change direction and focus more on missionary work and helping the people of the galaxy. It was the only reason she actually decided to rejoin the Jedi Order, because they were finally doing what their mandate suggested they do. Ahsoka noticed that Luke was wearing a different outfit, and she said hi to him, and explained that Kenobi and Yoda were waiting for them. Ahsoka had joined the ranks of the Jedi High Council during this time, and she was a very prominent voice for the entire Jedi Order. Of course, sitting in a council with voices such as Yoda, Kenobi, Depa Billaba, Shaak Ti, and Plo Koon, it was pretty obvious that there were a lot of influential voices. It was probably the best council they had since the Clone Wars. Regardless, the Skywalkers walked forward towards the room of the two Jedi Masters that were residing in it. Anakin told his son to head in. He'd wait outside until he was done, and then he would join them. Luke walked in and noticed that both Jedi were old, but in a healthy way. Obi-Wan was 70, but he didn't wear it. He wasn't entirely gray, his skin looked healthy, and so did his beard. He didn't look like someone who had tried to kill his best friend or lose his order, or sleep on rocks in the desert for 20 years. He was very healthy looking, and still a fit Jedi Master, and Yoda, while being over 900 years old, looked great too. Again, not having to live with the Order falling, and doing his morning routine face work in the swamps of Dagobah, which really helped his 900-year-old look stay rather dapper.
Young Skywalker, nice it is to see you again.
Hello there, Luke. What can we help you with?
Ben, Yoda, it's great to see you. I suspect my father told you about everything that had happened and what I'd gone through.
For the most part, yes, he did.
Well, firstly, thank you for all your guidance. I know you two don't remember it, but it was very influential on my life. Secondly, there is a darkness lurking here on Coruscant. The Emperor, who you would refer to as Palpatine, has haunted my dreams since Vader defeated him, and he still haunts them. I don't know what to do.
Trust the Force, Luke. A guide it may be, for a future yet unknown.
Are you suggesting that the Sith have returned once more?
No, maybe, I don't know. All I do know is that there is a darkness here and it's calling to me. I'd assume because I'm used to a much darker timeline. I come from a time where I am one of less than 100 Jedi in the galaxy.
Come, young Skywalker. Use the Force we will to find where this darkness comes from.
Luke took a step forward and got down on the ground between the two Jedi as they leaned over and placed their hands on his shoulder, both of them focusing on the Force. They told Luke to go into his mind and see where the darkness was coming from, yet nothing was really coming from it. It seemed like there was just a loop in the galaxy itself, though the Jedi stayed focused for several hours, and the only conclusion they came to was nothing. Just nightmares. The Jedi told Luke to focus on finding himself peace with what has been and what will be. In such a peace, he would be able to find solidarity and even happiness. But if Luke struggled, then they would be here if he needed them. Luke walked out of the room a little disappointed. Maybe it was that he hadn't found his own peace yet. That surely wasn't far-fetched of an idea, because truthfully, how could he even found his inner peace in such a short period of time? Luke needed to practice that peace. The Jedi did also offer him up a position inside of their order, allowing him to start off as a Jedi Knight. The reason being is that Luke was already trained as a Jedi Knight, and because Anakin wasn't seen as a failure of a test, then it should work relatively well if Luke wanted to join the Order at 32 years old. Luke didn't want to join the Order at the moment, and he exited the temple with his father. On the way out, he saw the fiery redhead and made a strategic approach.
Mara, how good to see you. It's been too long.
Indeed it has been. How have the politics of the galaxy been treating you?
Not as well as the sand. Let me tell you, remarkable.
I'm sorry. What?
You know, like how great sand is, and yeah, how sand and politics are the same, filled with so many possibilities and even potential.
I'm not following. Are you all right, Luke?
Yeah, I'm doing terrific.
Really? Sounds like you're going to build a sandcastle.
Well, no, maybe no sandcastles today.
All right. Well, it was nice catching up.
I've got to be in the training halls. I'll see you around, Sandboy.
Luke turned around. That was excruciating. Not nearly as bad as the look on his father's face, though. Luke could feel a seething disappointment from his father. The two walked next to each other, as Mara turned around, whipping her hair out of her face, as she looked back at Luke as he walked with his father out of the temple. What a weird conversation.
What was that, Luke?
You told me to talk about sand. I don't know what that means.
Oh, my Force, Luke, be romantic. I still remember what I told your mother. I don't like sand. It's coarse and it's rough and irritating and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth. I mean, seriously, Luke, it's not that hard.
Okay, but Dad, I like sand.
You what? You like sand? Not even the Luke from this timeline liked sand? How in the galaxy could you like sand? You grew up on Tatooine, right?
Well, yeah, I did, but you're missing the point. How on Coruscant did that line work on Mom?
Luke, you see, I'm the Riz Master. It's all about your composure. Come on, I'll teach you.
Dad, I'm 32. I think I'll try my own approach.
Alright, suit yourself. Sand boy.
Anakin pushed Luke a little and started walking out of the temple. Luke smiled and then turned around. He caught a glimpse of Mara looking in his direction before she immediately whipped around after seeing Luke catch her in the act of looking in his direction. Luke grinned. It may have not been a smooth move, but it at least got her attention, somehow. Luke and Anakin left the Jedi Temple as Luke began thinking about where his life would take him. So many choices. There was the path of the Jedi, there was a path of the politician, and there was a path of the sand, which hilariously was a combination of Jedi politician and Mara. See, Luke began to think about it. Maybe the sand had a deeper meaning. Anakin didn't go further into it, but maybe there was a point to it. Regardless, Luke's sister was off-world. She had to go to Corellia to negotiate a trade deal. Though while she was there, she needed repairs for her shuttle. Leia didn't personally oversee her vessel's construction, but the guards took the vessel to the best shop in all of Corellia. It was run by a local, and the shop was called Solos. It sold starships of all sorts, speeders, and even hovercraft. Everything anyone in Corellia could ever want. The shop was run and owned by a husband and wife. They had a couple kids, but all the kids went off-world to follow their own dreams. The husband's name was Han and his wife was Kira. They were never able to get off of Corellia, and after the Republic won the Clone Wars, the crime and mob bosses who called Corellia home were forced out or destroyed by clone forces. Sure, it was a step down from the accomplishments of the men during the Clone Wars, but it was far better than being phased out by commando-trained civilians dressed in armor that wasn't nearly as good as your own. Han and Kira's lives drastically changed thanks to the Republic. Had the Republic not cracked down on the mob bosses after the Clone Wars, chances are Han and Kira would be killed or be in a much worse predicament. They were able to build a business, and through a little bit of illegal activity, Han was able to accumulate a solid amount of wealth. This illegal activity was in the underground street racing of Corellia. He made a lot of credits during that brief stint of time in his life. He and Kira saved up some credits and opened up a small shop near the dockyards, which turned out to be a brilliant idea for business. All the people who traveled to work on the docks were able to get their speeders repaired on the way or during work hours, and then pick up their fixed vehicles when they were done and heading back. Solo built a small-time empire with his first love, and they were living happily ever after on Corellia. Their work was popular enough to garner the attention of politicians traveling to Corellia and going off-world, which is exactly how Leia's shuttle ended up inside of their shop. Incredibly close to meeting someone who in another time would have changed each other's lives. Leia's short stint on Corellia would have her returning to Coruscant after her trade debacle. It was rather unsuccessful, but on the bright side, her vessel was flying like it was brand new. On Coruscant, Luke was spending his time with his mother in the luxury district. The two of them were getting some quality mom and son time, especially considering Luke hadn't ever gotten it before. Luke was still in a bit of a ruse. The dark side surrounded everything, and yet he was able to find peace with his mother. She had a very calming essence, something Anakin felt on Naboo before finding his mother, captured and abused by the Tuscans. Padme shared the stories about everything, certain events he may have missed, and so forth. There was so much that Luke needed to be caught up on. Padme told Luke about family vacations to incredible planets around the galaxy. Luke came to learn about the family lake house on Naboo, and how eager Padme was to introduce her family to him. There was so much he could experience for the first time. While this was rather arduous, even say, difficult for Padme, it was also exciting. She got to go through this experience with Luke and Leia when they were babies, and into small children. The excitement of everything in the new stages of life, where infants and children soaked up information like sponges. Padme got to, in a way, enjoy that with her son again, but this time she would be able to enjoy it with her son as an adult, where he could effectively communicate his emotions and feelings to her. It was kind of something so sweet, and yet something so unforgettable for a parent. Something Padme never thought she'd have the joy of enjoying again with her son. Though, of course, she understood the predicament of such occurrences having to happen, and she felt bad that Luke had to undergo this transformation into this timeline, but she realized how important and pivotal her role was for her son, because he never had her in his timeline. He never even met her, let alone knew her. With her being here, she could have already had an incredible effect on him, and she did. And such effect needed to be positive. In Padme's eyes, during this time, she needed to be positive. During this walk through the park, Luke would reveal to his mother the dreams that he'd been having. It's not that he didn't want to tell his father, it's just a matter of the moment where he was with his mother. During their walk through the luxurious districts, Luke would tell his mother that he was having terrible nightmares, and Padme had all the right responses for her son, informing him that his father had very similar experiences when they were younger. Though Anakin's dreams were always seeming to revolve around premonitions involving those he loved. And thankfully, Anakin's visions of Padme dying during childbirth were false, but there were also several other visions afterwards that did come true. But what Padme heard from her son made her in a way worry for him. The dreams sounded very intense and nearly traumatic. Padme told Luke that she wanted him to talk to his father about the dreams and see if there was anything they could do about those dreams. Luke mentioned how he told Obi-Wan and Yoda previously, but not even Luke had mentioned to anyone how every night they were becoming increasingly worse. The nightmares were hyper-realistic, so tangible it felt a part of the real galaxy, and they only got worse, leading him further and further away from inner peace. Padme talked to Anakin about this, and he started to think about how he could help his son. The difficult part for both Padme and Anakin is that their son, from this timeline, would have been much easier to help because they knew him. But they didn't know the war hero that their son was now. The Luke that they had now was much different. He was a much different man, and he needed to be treated and cared for as such. Anakin spent a lot of time meditating, trusting the Force that it would guide him through this process to make sure his son was doing alright, and make sure that he could actually help his son through this process. One night, while Leia was off-world, Luke rose from his sleep. He stepped through the house without inflection in his stride. He walked like a man possessed. He got into his speeder and shot across the city world of Coruscant. Luke wasn't even fully awake. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. And then he arrived in an old rusted building, ages older than the era of the High Republic. Luke landed the vessel and got out of it. He felt a darkness swelling around him, though this wasn't Palpatine. Luke walked forward, and out from the darkness came disfigured beings, screaming at him and tackling him to the ground. A deep, coarse, and creepy voice echoed out of the chamber, telling the creatures to bring Luke to him. The creatures dragged Luke to the other room, where instead of an altar, like there had been during the era of Palpatine, there were now test tubes lining the halls of the room, and in the middle, and in every open crevice, a Sith artifact. The room was incredibly powerful with the dark side of the Force, and it made Luke naturally weak. The creature ordering others around was tall, but very decrepit. His body almost seemed to be in shambles, and when his face was revealed by the light, it was a heavily damaged Mun. Luke looked over at the Mun in shock. He didn't know who it was, so Luke demanded to know who it was. The Sith Lord stood over Luke and said,
I am Darth Plagueis the Wise. I've been watching your family for decades.
You're the Sith Lord?
I am the only Sith Lord. My foolish apprentice assumed I was weak enough to be killed, but he was wrong.
What do you want with me?
Everything. I've got samples from Palpatine to Mace Windu. I've raided the midichlorians from dead bodies, and I've begun a new Sith. But these Sith are entirely subservient to me. I create them with the Force and grow them within these tubes.
You're a monster.
No, I'm a survivor. And I will do what my foolish apprentice couldn't accomplish with a galactic war. My spawn will take over what has never been conquered before.
Wait, who is your apprentice?
Palpatine. He thought he killed me in my sleep, but he forgot that I mastered the ability to escape death. He was so arrogant in his power. When I returned to my sanctuary here, I discovered him using my lair. So I decided to wait him out. I was foolish to trust him with my knowledge, but he was blinded by his inability to have clairvoyance in his endeavor to destroying the Jedi.
Luke looked in horror at Plagueis. He couldn't believe that Palpatine had an evil master, and even more than that, the fact that he was still alive. It didn't make any sense, but a moment later a needle was shoved into his back and he fell deep into sleep. Plagueis was so pleased. He'd spent decades preparing for this moment. Plagueis knew he wouldn't be able to defeat Anakin on his own, because he just wasn't powerful enough to defeat something created purely by the Force. That's part of the reason he forced Maul and Talon out to face Luke. He believed that Luke would lower his guard if he defeated Maul and Talon, which is exactly what happened. Luke's guard was completely lowered because he believed all the Sith had been destroyed. The beings that Plagueis was creating now weren't able to develop into high-thinking creatures. They were disfigured, and they could only do nothing but listen. It was to assure to Plagueis that he wouldn't be betrayed by these minions like he was by Palpatine. Once Luke was knocked out, Plagueis ordered his minions to load up his ship and prepare for launch. The Sith Lord was going to take Luke off-world and have him executed, away from his lair, and then return to begin his creation of more minions from the blood of Skywalker. Plagueis had dozens of minions, but they were all of various ages, and many of them were not fully developed. Regardless, Plagueis entered his vessel and the ship took off. Instead of the Jedi Temple, Mara Jade woke up. She felt Luke's essence as if it was in danger. Mara leapt from her bed and ran towards Master Tano's room and woke her up, telling her that Luke was in serious danger. Plagueis' vessel took off and left the system, leaving towards the planet of Kashyyyk. Mara and Ahsoka ran towards the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple. Ahsoka made contact with the fleet command as their two starships flew out of the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple towards the hyperspace rings above the planet. Ahsoka contacted the men on the comms, asking if they had any readout on any particular ships leaving the atmosphere. The truth is, they didn't, and they couldn't even if they didn't. Sure, the Republic officers didn't have an issue with the Jedi, but the Republic had no obligation to take orders from the Jedi, or hand out classified information, especially considering Luke wasn't Anakin or Padme, and he hadn't, up until this point, garnered enough of a reputation to be searched for by the Republic. Ahsoka communicated to Mara, telling her that it was her who had to connect to Luke. She would be the only one who could save him. Ahsoka told Mara to trust the Force and focus on the connection she had with Luke. While Leia and Anakin had a really deep connection with Luke through the Force, they didn't have the same connections with this Luke. The only reason Mara picked up on Luke so quickly was because of their little mission previously. Their connection was very quickly built off of an intense bond. Mara focused her mind, and she was taken to a forest moon. But she saw a different Luke Skywalker. It wasn't the sand-loving man she knew thus far, it was something else. Mara told Ahsoka that there would be a forested world, but there were so many forested planets in the galaxy that she didn't know which one it was. Mara turned around and then she saw a Kaibuk, the horned and hooved creatures that were native exclusively to the planet of Kashyyyk. Mara yelled out the name of the planet, and immediately Ahsoka and Mara shot off into hyperspace towards the Wookiee homeworld. On Kashyyyk, Plagueis had his minions drag Skywalker out into the forest. The reason Plagueis brought Luke here was on the off chance that someone had a connection with him, followed him here, wouldn't discover Plagueis' labs on Coruscant. Luke was laying down in the floors of Kashyyyk. Plagueis instructed his minions to get the blast blood cells required before the execution, and then Luke rose up. Plagueis smiled, reaching his hands forward preparing to shoot electricity into Skywalker, and then he realized something. Something he was fully unaware of up until this point. He and Skywalker were inextricably connected. This was simply because, in a way, Plagueis was Anakin's father, and he never knew that, meaning that he had a direct path to Luke, which, in turn for the Sith Lord, meant that he could extract Luke's conscience and turn him into his own personal slave. Plagueis reached forward and began an ancient Sith ritual.
Irutima, Tikasha ritumbi reanudo kinito, Priraseta tumreka, Tunushi turito iru irshafito libata oit, Keno bermuti.
Luke began shaking back and forth, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head as he rose from the ground with the snapping and cracking of what sounded like broken bones. Plagueis smiled proudly, telling Luke that he would wait here and kill whoever crossed his path. There were meant to be no survivors. Once he killed the Jedi, he would find himself his way back to the planet of Coruscant and join his new master. Plagueis and his minions upped and left Kashyyyk. The amount of activity in the jungle drew a tribe of Wookiees. They were interested in who had landed, as they went in to investigate, and then they were slaughtered by Luke Skywalker, mercilessly. All the men, women, and children of the tribe were massacred, and their villages and their trees were set aflame. As Luke left the village, he sat in the middle of a clearing as the fires cascaded around him. The sounds of animals running could be heard as their stampede exited the forest, trying to escape the raging fire. Amongst the chaos, 2 Jedi starships landed in the clearing. Mara got out of the ship and called out to Luke, but he didn't move. Ahsoka noticed this, telling Mara to stay clear of Luke as he rose from the ground and turned around, facing the 2 Jedi. Ahsoka and Mara got up next to each other. It was clear there was something not right with Luke, and they couldn't allow him to continue down this treatment. Ahsoka, being a Jedi Master, had access to the restricted section of the Jedi Archives, and she told Mara that she needed a moment to think on this. Luke ignited his lightsaber, and Mara reciprocated by igniting her own lightsaber. Mara told Ahsoka that she would give her as much time as she needed. Mara tried to coax Luke down, talking about things she knew about him, at which point was rather hard to do because he was acting a little bit like a psycho. Luke was noticeably off balance, like there was a small part of him hanging on, desperately trying to fight the power that was corrupting him. Luke swung viciously at Mara as he fell to the ground, losing balance and cutting his own face with his lightsaber as he tumbled to the ground. He growled in pain as he turned around. Mara looked at Luke. There was a mark on his face that barely missed his eye. It mirrored Anakin's scar. Luke got back up and swung at Mara, but she parried and a strike swung back. Luke barely blocked it and fell to the ground. If Luke wasn't possessed, this competition would be much more of a competition, but the possession placed on him was meant to either get him killed or allow him to become a tool for Plagueis. See, the Sith Lord wasn't going to take another student on. He knew that if Luke died, then all the information would die with him. It's the same case for what would have happened had he been able to be a victor in this competition. Plagueis would have just killed him anyways. Luke lunged from the floor and dragged his blade through the dirt, swinging violently at Mara. She was quick on her feet to move out of the way as she tripped Luke and used the Force to pull his lightsaber from his hands. Ahsoka caught Luke from hitting the ground, grabbing a hold of his head and wrapping her arms around it lightly. Ahsoka began speaking to Luke, using an ancient Jedi limerick, and then repeating the phrase multiple times. As she did, Luke slowly came out. He got a few words out, saying Coruscant Industrial Sector before fading into his sleep. Ahsoka lowered Luke to the ground, telling Mara to keep an eye on him. And while she did, Ahsoka would contact Anakin Skywalker and tell him to go to the Industrial Sector of Coruscant. Of course, Ahsoka could contact the Jedi, but she knew that Anakin would likely get there faster. With an extra 22 years of Force training, Anakin would be able to lock on to the layer. The only reason he was able to lock onto it now, rather than before, is that Plagueis, while on Coruscant, actively hid his essence, and because neither the Jedi or Skywalker were searching for darkness, they never led themselves into the Industrial Sector. The Industrial Sector had been hidden for more than 40 years, used by Palpatine and then by Plagueis. It was pretty safe no matter what was going on in the galaxy, but now that Anakin had a reason to look for the darkness here on Coruscant, he immediately left his apartment. Plagueis arrived in his lair. He told his minions to prepare his samples, while he prepared himself for the creation process. Plagueis had to have intense and immaculate focus during this process of creating a being with the Force, so he moved into his personal room surrounded by Sith artifacts and closed his eyes. A few hours later, he would walk out and he heard the sound of running water. Odd, but maybe it was just a leak. As he rounded the corner, he looked into the tube room, where he saw a shadow standing quietly. On the ground, there were minions slayed, but not with a lightsaber, with the Force. How did he not hear this? Anakin had actually gotten here before Plagueis even arrived in the building, and he stepped forward.
Hello, Dark Lord. Are you ready to meet your fate?
I don't fear you, Skywalker. I will kill you.
I'd like to see you try.
Plagueis shot lightning at Anakin, and Skywalker just walked to the lightning, stepping over the bodies of the minions, and then reached out with his metal hand and wrapped it around Plagueis' throat. The Sith Lord continued to pour lightning on the Skywalker as he was lifted off of his feet, but it had no effect. Anakin simply smiled as he twisted his wrist ever so slightly, and Plagueis' body went limp. Anakin threw the body and laughed to himself, not even a real challenge. On the forest world of Kashyyyk, Luke woke up and looked directly into the eyes of Mara Jade. She looked down at him and smiled, saying,
Rise and shine, Sandboy.
What happened, Mara?
Well, you were possessed. Your aunt saved you, and I've been waiting for you to wake up. Also, your dad brought balance to the Force again.
Oh, well, thank you. How about we head back to Coruscant, and I thank you for your efforts.
Mara raised an eyebrow and then helped Luke up. She knew what that was, an offer for a net on the town on Coruscant. Irresistible. So, of course, she would decide that she would give Sky Guy Jr. a chance. Anakin would set explosives inside the Sith lair and demolish it forever, extinguishing the era of Sith and removing them from ever having a chance at returning. Luke and Mara would return, and it would eventually lead to Mara following in Anakin's footsteps, leaving the Order for love. Leia, on the other hand, would have no issue bonding with a wealthy politician on Coruscant, while the legacy of Skywalker would continue far beyond using the Force, but contributing to the greater society of the galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Bedro Wells, Tigerboard, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Mad Max Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flint Ben Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video, because something is coming next. If you want to see a what if, you know all the things, write them down below. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. Alright, so this is one of two stories that have gotten a lot of requests for a part 2, and I decided that I would do a part 2 for both of them. One of them is a video that is a couple months old, but it's the most requested part 2 video I have, and I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm sure you guys will figure it out. but you guys are geniuses, you know that. And so this one was one that was more recent, and I'm not gonna lie, this was probably one of the more challenging videos I had to write, because there's so much going on. And so the challenge of this video was first of all connecting the dots back to the first video, because I think I mentioned this before, but typically what happens is I write a video and I completely move on from it. So I write a video and then I like get ready for the next one, and that's kind of just my schedule. So like I don't typically, if you go on Twitch or any of the other things like podcast, Twitch, whatever it is, you you know that when I do a video, I typically write a video and then I get ready for the next video. So I don't really have time to like sit in the video that I wrote, and so most of the time I just kind of forget about the video. So for me, I had to kind of go back and start over with this process and be like, all right, where'd the video go? Where's all this stuff? And so, you know, I didn't want Han and Leia getting together. It's not that I don't like their relationship. It doesn't make sense in this story for them to be together. It just doesn't. I mean, I'm sure you could do like a whole video about, you know, Solo, a Star Wars Penti Patrol story, you know, and do that whole thing, but I'm not going to do that, I assure you. But, you know, Han Solo growing up on Corellia and not really leaving Corellia and like making a life for himself on Corellia, that's kind of the whole thing that goes on there. And then for, you know, the villain, that was the fun part. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I've been trying to figure out how I was gonna do this video for about a week, and that's while writing other videos. And so Plagueis came out of nowhere. I don't know where Plagueis came from, but I wanted to make a point, and I made a point through what Plagueis said in dialect during the video, and that's that Plagueis, I'm suggesting that Plagueis survived his attack by Palpatine and then went back to his lair, and then Palpatine like held him in captive and killed him in canon. That's what I'm suggesting happened. And then, so that's like excusing the fact that, you know, Plagueis like lives in the situation. So it makes it so that Plagueis doesn't actually exist in the canon timeline except to Sidious, where he just takes advantage of him and basically like learns everything he can from him just to kill him. And then in this one, he just avoids Palpatine and waits him out. And that's kind of the big difference. So it's a little bit of the two timeline thing, I'm not gonna lie, screwed with me a lot. It screwed with me a lot. That was the biggest challenge of this. The two timeline thing really messed with me. But I really try to stay continuous to the timeline, to the timelines that I created. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. This was a challenge. I'm not gonna lie, it was a challenge to write this part too. But I really hope you all enjoyed. Full movie will come out at some point. I don't know when, but you know, the full movie will come out at some point. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.